What's up, Nets fans? You are now in the backcourt for episode 9, a Brooklyn Nets podcast presented by Ticketmaster. I am your host, Lucas Kaplan of Nets Film Focus, writer for NetsDaily, and joined by me, as always, is Yes Network color commentator extraordinaire, Sarah Kustok. Sarah, how are we doing?
We're doing great. We're doing great. Lucas, how are you?
I'm good. I was talking to Nick Claxton last night, and he said, I don't really like only playing 1-2 games a week, this dip in the schedule. The couple days of rest are nice at first, but, we're 3 weeks into December, the Nets have only played 5 games. And I think we're all ready to get back to the regular grind of the NBA. And so I'm ready for the Nets to keep playing these games. Although right now, not too bad. Caught up on film. It's like 60 degrees and sunny a week before Christmas.
What's up with this? I will tank it.
I
Especially
know.
since yesterday it was cold and it was rainy. I walk outside today and I was like, oh,
I
sunshine.
know.
It
I
feels
followed
warm.
I followed in your lead. I went for a run yesterday in the rain. I was soaking wet. I was kind of miserable. But I think we've
It's
earned a
like
sunny day.
it's a fun experience until you wake up and you've got a little scratchy throat because you've just been running
Yeah.
in the rain. So yeah,
Mhm.
now I'll take
Mhm.
it. We'll both take the sunshine.
No, I don't mind it. And especially with the Nets next game, they got to go to Toronto the day after this will come out, and it might be freezing there. But as for the past week, of which we will be talking about, again, the Nets only had 2 games. They lost in Memphis, a very feisty game. Memphis saved themselves from getting swept by the Nets on a schedule technicality. And then the Nets came home and lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers last night on Monday. We're recording this on Tuesday. But of course, I think we have to lead with the trade of Dennis Schröder. As we've all talked about, as management, Sean Marks has talked about, it's about building long-term sustainable success, trading Dennis for future draft picks, Reece Beekman, rookie that we'll talk about. We all kind of know why the Nets do it, why it makes sense. Still hard, obviously, to see Dennis go. And man, you can tell he really, really made an impression on the organization for only being here for 10 months. Am I right?
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, but I think it speaks to the understanding of the direction this organization is going and the direction they want to be in and the type of players and personnel disposition that fits. And I think, for the long-term plan, and Jordy Fernandez talked about this, Sean Marks talked about this, the fact that he would be a free agent at the end of this year and just what that looked like in terms of a potential better opportunity in the short term for Dennis. He did have the type of character and the grit, the feistiness, how he played on the floor, the person he was off the floor that I think fits the type of guy you want around in an organization. So obviously, this is a business and business decisions are made. But overall, I think the amount that he poured into what Brooklyn was,
Mm-hmm.
both with the Nets, with the community, the experiences that we all had to share with him, and I think also just for the players and just how they all were able to come together. He was a big part of that, and so you give a lot of appreciation, a lot of credit for the ways in which he did contribute, and the ways those contributions will continue to be felt even after he is gone, and hopefully finding a lot of success with the Warriors.
Absolutely. That's an interesting fit right there, playing next to Steph. They've had a lot
Yeah.
of battles handling the ball over there in Golden State. Yeah, Nick Claxton said after the game last night, he was really the only one, been on this team, longest tenured member, and felt free to speak his mind. And he said, it's not an excuse for why we lost to Cleveland, but, I'm not going to lie. The last couple days, practice, shoot around without Dennis, that vocal leader in the locker room, that vet, it was a little weird. And that's the NBA, and obviously the Nets will have to adjust to it. But, in February of this year, the Nets trade expiring contract Spencer Dinwiddie for Dennis, and then the Raptors cut Spencer. So essentially, the Raptors are just salary dumping Dennis Schroeder in that deal. And that's kind of where he entered this organization at. We weren't sure, what type of guy Dennis was. He's been in the league a while, but you never really know until you're covering him every day or you're coaching him every day. And he just made a fantastic impression, played hard from the jump, was about all the right things. and, obviously was having a heck of a year for the Nets. And they're going to have to replace a lot of ball handling, which we'll talk about. But, the thing that stands out is what we mentioned, the character, the leadership. This is probably the last week I can have from Braunschweig to Brooklyn behind me, this poster. Still a fantastic, short documentary that everyone should watch, if this is the time about his journey to the NBA. But in terms of on-court performance, what will the Nets be missing? What do they have to not replace, but what are the holes they have to cover up?
I think it's easy to point to ball handling. You could look at the
Right.
point production and the ability to get downhill,
Hmm.
the shooting, the mid range, all of those things. And I'm not saying anything is easily replaceable, but sometimes that's things that are manufactured in other places with other people. Ball handling is one thing. I think there, though, is a difference that needs to be understood between ball handlers and a point guard, someone that truly understands how to organize, how to orchestrate, how to hit the hot hand, what buttons to push, when to do it. And there's differing levels of that. But that's a real tangible thing that you can watch in how an offense operates. And in particular, down the stretch of games, closing time, time and score situations, so much is circumstantial. And so it's not just about the long run of how a team is playing or the way in which you're producing or how you fill the gaps, but he was a point guard and he ran the team in that way. And so, in terms of trying to fill that, it's going to take time and it's going to take multiple people and it's going to take, continued learning and experiencing just some of the difference or the evolving nature of what things look like with this group. And it's not to say that you change the way you play, but it was clear. We heard from Jordy Fernandez. We saw how they played. There may be a change given who's running things and if Ben Simmons is playing and what that looks like in terms of pace, tempo, where shots are coming from, who's getting shots, because everything changes with obviously you're not just looking at tempo with pace, but the scoring threat that Ben Simmons is very different than the scoring threat that Dennis Schroeder was, and you can go down the list, the size, physicality. There's all sorts of things. So it's not to say good or bad, but different. And so how do you figure out ways in which it's going to best help the team in the totality of it and how everyone functions? And I think there's a learning process to that because you had an off season, you had a training camp, everything that you went into it with a lot of what Dennis was doing. And I think just overall, you saw how that turned up against Cleveland Cavaliers, best offense in the league, top 10 defense, second in the league in points off turnovers. Like there are things they fundamentally do to every team that really came to life when they were playing Brooklyn. But you saw that with this group, and those are the things you need to figure out. Okay, how are we going to move forward? And with who are we going to do that? And how can everyone play a part in helping make this be better?
Yeah, Cleveland dominated. They won 130 to 101, 29-point win. And, the issues or the reasons Brooklyn lost last night obviously go beyond Dennis. But it should not be, I don't think, a death sentence for their offense. Nets also missing Cam Thomas, and the combination of missing both those guys without, reintegrating Ben Simmons into the starting lineup yet. They got a lot to figure out, and they're missing CT. It's a lot to deal with. But, the first game they played without Dennis this season was that win in Sacramento, and their offense looked great. They got up 39 threes. A lot of them were wide open. They made 19 of them. Even they only turned the ball over 14 times, which is, a very acceptable rate. And we saw how this offense can look without Dennis. But one thing the Nets were also doing in that game was getting stops, allowing them to, push the pace with Ben Simmons, in the starting lineup. That's going to be imperative. And just to touch on it, it was really the turnovers, I think, last night that doomed the Nets in that first half. And a lot of them were avoidable. A lot of them
Yes.
were not because they were missing Dennis. It was a miscommunication on a handoff. I remember one where Jaylen Wilson had the ball and someone was coming up, for a handoff, and they back cut, and Jaylen didn't think they were going to back cut, and so he kind of threw the ball to nowhere, and Cleveland picked it off. and it was a layup the other way. Those seemed preventable to me. And, for all that Cleveland did well, it did feel like the Nets shot themselves in the foot a little bit last night.
I couldn't agree more. And you said it, like there were some instances that the Cleveland defense was just very good, or they're going to shoot the gaps or pressure, but they were a step ahead. And whether it was telegraphing passes, whether it was not truly understanding the timing, tracking in for a lot of these guys, maybe a little bit of pass for others. You played against Donovan Mitchell a lot. You know his reach, you know his length, you know where he's going to grab. You played it. So that is one point that I think there were a lot that if you understand in the game plan discipline of how a team wants to play, what they want to do, where their bread is buttered, and obviously they have a ton of strength across the table, being much more mindful of that and attention to detail about that. And that's where I think the disappointing, because the Nets had such a great start. They were locked in. They were obviously created some great offensive looks, knocking down three-point shots. And so it felt like they set the tone at a very high rate. And that's where you would want to see it continue. And I know that, Lucas, we talked a little bit before the pod, and we'll get into, and this is less Dennis and more just in general, there was a handful of missed blockouts that guys were next. So the two areas of points off turnover, second chance, those are all things which, if you want to really strip it down and say, okay, these are correctable things. Like, you still shoot over 40% against a very, very good Cleveland defense. You still do XYZ positive things.
Yeah.
Despite the score aside, if you're able to clean up those areas, that's where you start to look at it and say, okay, you're gonna have to make sure that there's no slippages, because against some of the best teams in the league, which I would put Cleveland as one of those, in particular the Eastern Conference, you're not going to be able to have those margins for error and still be able to feel like you're going to compete in this one.
And Jordy got on the boys pretty hard in post game, and I understand, because those things that we talk about, the Nets have really done all season, and they've been on their P's and Q's, and they weren't last night, and that's really what led to the loss. And you can kind of look at certain areas on the stat sheet. Second chance points, in transition, off turnovers, but they all kind of compound. And like, if you turn the ball over and they go the other way and get a dunk, it's a fast break point, it's a point off turnover, it's a point in the paint. And so last night definitely went beyond the stat sheet, and it was disappointing because the Nets, like you said, shot 40% from three and should not have been a game that they were out of in the fourth quarter. Though I will say they did win the second half, so at least they have some sort of positive momentum going into this next week. And I wanted to change up the order of things a bit, because our first segment, I wanted to start with the next net. The next net that we're looking for, really to step up. This team is different now without their primary ball handler. Cam Thomas is, given the initial reports, his return shouldn't be too distant in the future. But for right now, the available players that they have, who is the next net that you're watching to step up for, in Dennis's absence, or maybe just in general?
I'm going to look at, and again, I feel like we've done this, so we've talked about a handful of people, and it may be a little bit repetitive, but I'm going to circle back to Jaylen Wilson.
Okay.
He's had two solid games, both against Memphis, against Cleveland, in terms of how comfortable he's looked shooting. Obviously, three-point shot's going to be a huge part of his game. But I think just the other areas that we talked about at the early part of the season, that we saw through the preseason and into the year, of how he's able to put the ball on the deck, how he's able to decision make with his size and strength in the paint once he is, in a driving mode, in more of a create mode, what he can do on the defensive side, because he is someone that can pick up a point guard, pick up full. I'm curious to see how this may, in some ways, continue to open up a little bit more runway and areas for him, and what he can continue to develop into. I think he is someone that will find his way in his space, not only with this group now, but in the future. And so I think this, again, opens up just a little bit more room and leeway for a higher usage and higher need for how he can continue to contribute to this group. And I think now that he's had an opportunity, I think for players, it's not your rookie year, but in your second year when you're actually getting more time, you're getting more run, I think you can get your feet under you, legs, under you in a different way as the months go on and as the season goes on. And he's someone that I absolutely think can do that, will thrive with that, and that I think that we should keep an eye on.
Yeah, and you know this. It's not enough to be a 3-and-D strictly player in the NBA anymore. You have to be able to make decisions off the closeout. You have to be able to add a couple more things in your game.
Right.
Because especially to survive in the playoffs when weaknesses are magnified. And for Jaylen, it seems to be, aside from being a really tenacious offensive rebounder and defensive rebounder for that matter, what can you do off the dribble? We've seen him get to the rim. One of the first episodes we talked about his decision-making late on drives. You just want to see him keep expanding that. And just to recap his week, in Memphis, he scored 15 points on 3 of 8 from 3. He had 4 assists, which was nice to see. And then against Cleveland last night, he scored 13 points on 4 of 8 shooting from 3. And he had some deep ones off the catch, And the more of those he puts in, the harder closeouts he's going to see.
Yes.
And for him, I think it's just about finding more comfortable counters inside the arc. Like, we know he can go right, and we know he can put his shoulder into you and kind of slow down and create space. But he had one drive where he took it from the left wing last night and kind of got stuck under the basket and was forced into throwing up a really tough layup attempt. And it's like, a spin back left or an extra dribble or a jump stop and a pivot. You know what I mean? Maybe could have gotten him an easier look. And I think he has the talent to do it. I think he has the ball handling reps to do it. It's just about getting comfortable.
Without a doubt.
For me, it's Ben Simmons, my next net to watch. Just going to be handling the ball more, going to be in the starting lineup. And he had some good takes in transition last night where took it all the way to the rim, 4 of 7 shooting, 10 points. The 6 turnovers to 8 assists last night. I thought the 6 turnovers, some of them were, easily preventable. A lot of them were just kind of in the flow of the Nets offense, and he was subject to the same mistakes that the rest of his teammates were. But what is, in your mind, 1 or 2 things Ben has to do now that he's maybe going to be playing 30 minutes a night as he did last night and maybe probably going to be touching the ball more than anyone else on this team?
Attention to detail. Mm-hmm. We can focus all we want on the shooting, on being more aggressive, going to the basket, all of those things. And I think there's moments that, and even in last night's game, that he showed more of a propensity for that. That will be a standard, always.
Right.
Needs to be more aggressive going to the basket and looking for his own shot. I will say that flatly, and so that will not change. But the attention to detail on the passing, on the handles, I think there's times, and we've seen this a lot, that there's just a little bit of a carelessness of how he's passing, where he's passing to with his handles, that, he has 6 turnovers last night.
Yeah.
And that was not a product of, to me, the Cleveland Cavaliers, they turn you over. That wasn't a product of you got the ball in your hands a lot. There was crazy defense. It was a lack of just making certain that he was getting the ball where it needed to go when. And I think that wasn't the first time we've seen it. And I think you never want to say anything's easily correctable, but that to me feels correctable in a sense of just being more engaged and understanding how that's going to work and what's going to happen and not being as loose with the basketball. And the one other thing I'll say, I know you said 1, but I'm going to give you 2, is defensively, obviously he has got all the physical gifts of size and strength, quickness, how he can pressure the ball, get in lanes, the anticipation, just keeping it clean in certain areas or spots that you are not, at half court where it's unnecessary, you're bumping, or just the small, there's small times or areas where, or just being cognizant of, okay, I already have to be fouled, so this is not the time, the place to pick up a 4th, or I just picked up 1. All of those things to me are a maturation process of what he can be. And I think there's such a push because the potential. We've seen it before, and we know there's even more there. But those two things, to me, I think will entirely change in some ways just how he's able to contribute to this team.
Yeah, and so and it's just about being consistent because the Nets' last 4 games against Indiana, against Milwaukee, Memphis, Cleveland. Those are 4 really good teams. Against Indiana, he was awesome on defense. If you can think back to that game, he had blocks on 3-pointers. He had strips inside. He had a couple steals. He was kind of everywhere and using his hands. Obi Toppin tried to take him to the rim, and he blocked it off the backboard. He was great on defense in that game, and that propelled them into transition the other way, where he excels. Milwaukee, there was a bit of a dip, I think. But against Memphis, the other game this week, they really stayed in it. They got back in it in that first half because he and the bench unit were incredibly solid on offense. He was creating open threes, driving and kicking. He had 8 assists to just 2 turnovers, and I thought a lot of those assists were real high value. They weren't just pass to a guy and he isolates into a jumper.
Yes.
So up, down, up, down. For the Nets to be consistent, their lead ball handler is going to have to be consistent. I'm not really breaking any news there. But like you said, we have seen it. And he's going to be a key factor for this team going forward. And so too might eventually be Reece Beekman, who I just wanted to quickly introduce Nets fans to. I know you're a little familiar with his game. What questions do you have kind of about his ability?
I'm not going to say I've seen him a ton, but I did see a little bit from So He Spent. I'm sure our listeners have a good feel that he was undrafted. He had spent 4 years, correct me if I'm wrong, in Virginia.
Yep.
It didn't spend most of the time. He played 2 games with the Golden State Warriors, but a lot of time with the Santa Cruz Warriors. And that's where I saw some clips and some different things from him. I remember him a little bit in college. So I'm not going to act like I've seen a ton on him. But what I do know is that you want to talk about defensiveness and defensive just abilities, feel, all sorts of areas and pressuring the ball. I think he was averaging close to 3 steals a game in the G League, put up points. He can do a little bit of everything, how he can facilitate. He's exciting in how he fits the profile of someone that fits into how Jordi Fernandez wants to play. Still young, raw, not a ton of experience. But to me, the excitement is you've got some of the tools and just the abilities that you're hoping will grow into the type of player that this could be a useful guy for the Brooklyn Nets. And so I'm just excited to see when he gets out there, what it looks like, his feel with teammates, all of those things, because what he's done to this point has it's been fun to watch and fun to just kind of listen to people talk about him and in what they think he can become.
Definitely. Aside from having a name that just kind of rolls off the tongue, Reece Beekman, right? Just very nice, alliteratively with the vowel sounds. It's assist to turnover ratio on offense. He is an incredibly, and I did some more research after the trade. I would say ambidextrous ball handler, can throw live dribble passes with both hands, makes a lot of high value reads, but also limits the turnovers. And what's encouraging is he's brought his game from Virginia to the G League and been awesome doing the things that we know he's done well. So he's played in 9 games with Santa Cruz Warriors, averaging 19 points, above 50% from the field, 35% from 3 attempts a game. So decent volume and a decent number, and that's kind of the question with his game, but that's real nice to see. And over 7 assists, 2 turnovers, 3 steals a game. The guy was maybe the best on-ball total package guard defender in this year's draft class, and yeah, he's a dog. And you're going to go down to Long Island to see him, and he'll probably get some run in Brooklyn. We've already seen their 2 ways before impact games. Tyrese Martin, and he was not a salary thrown in that Dennis Schröder trade. The trade would have worked without his salary. The Nets wanted him. Sean Marks talked about scouting him. Talked about this is not, hey, we need to add a guy, whatever. Reece, as a young project to watch, I'm pretty excited to track his development, if I do say so myself. And always like a guard that can mess up your stuff. We kind of had that a little bit with Dennis Smith Jr. last year, and it's fun to watch. And you get excited on the broadcast when a guy's picking up full court.
It makes a difference. It makes a difference.
It definitely does. And yeah, with that, I think Sarah and I are both in agreement. Clean up the turnovers, keep that feisty attitude. I loved the Memphis little kerfuffle or whatever you want to call it, and that can't change with Dennis gone. This Nets team has continued to annoy their opponents this year, and I'm sure you hear it sitting courtside.
Yes. Well, and I think that's why you've seen so many games that there is
Yeah,
a lot of chippiness and a lot of back and forth, and you love that and you appreciate that. And so I do think that will continue. I think a lot of it, the feistiness with Dennis, no question. But I also think, to your point about give credit to the entirety of this group for how close they became and how quickly they did and the chemistry they built. Because that's something that you cannot
hmm
manufacture or put together player profiles and figure out how teams are gonna gel together. And this team played for one another. They loved one another. They cared about one another. And so I do think sometimes there's an emotional shift that happens that, again, everyone's professionals. They get it. They're all going to respond and rebound. But when someone does leave, like it is easier said than done. Then we just need to fill the gaps and move on. And I too think just anytime that you wonder what the group is going to look like, how things are going to shake out, you're not going to know that for another couple months. And so that is not easy. On a team that, again, give them credit for the chemistry and the continuity that they built.
Yeah, and I even, not to put too much of their business out there, but I saw that last night in the locker room. Noah Clowney was not super thrilled with his performance. I don't think any net was. Noah fouled out after making 4 threes in the Grizzlies game. He fouled out against the Cavs, went 0 of 2 from 3, and he was just beating himself up a little. And Dayron and Nick Claxton, I can tell you, were right there saying, "Hey, it's okay. It happens. Like you're good." Just good teammate stuff, and just these guys really do care. And Nick was talking about how he trusts them to have the right response to a big loss. And after Dennis gets traded, it's almost nice to get it out of the way. It's like, okay, he's gone. That was a big loss. Let's flush it, and now we can move on and act normally. This stuff happens against a really good Cleveland team. So, this next week is all going to be about the response. They're going to go to Toronto. But the week wasn't all bad, and so that's why I want to bring it to Brooklyn's finest. I will start with Cam Johnson, who even more ball handling responsibilities now, even more offensive creation, just decided against the Cavs, you know what? I'm going to get to the line 13 times. I know a shooter like him probably wants to go a little bit better than 9 of 13, even though that ain't awful. But 22 points, 5 assists, 3 of 6 from 3. All he does is get better on offense with more opportunity, and took a charge, continues to be about the right things. Just another opportunity to shout Cam Johnson out.
5 assists.
Yeah.
How do you like that? I'm just gonna double down on, and I think I maybe said Cam Johnson last week, but I think he's
Mm-hmm.
just consistent.
Mm-hmm.
We use the word consistent in talking about what you want on a player. And to me, the greatest thing a player can be is consistent when you know what
Yeah.
you're gonna get each and every night. And Cam Johnson is at a point that consistently you know exactly what you're gonna get. And that's not just about the shooting, not just about his creation. You said it's a little bit of everything, what he does on the defensive side, being in the right place, the presence and the energy that he has. Uh, so yeah, I think it's been something that this team has needed. And when we're talking about the loss of Dennis Schroeder, I think he's been such a pivotal part of trying to maintain a levity and a balance for this group and what they're still trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and Jordy came in the press conference after the game against Cleveland, gave 3 answers, was very clear about what he wanted to see in terms of effort, not very happy, as you expect a head coach to be after a big loss. Cam Johnson followed it right up and sat there for 6-7 minutes, was in depth about things they need to do better, was talking about very level-headed, it's going to be okay, but this is what they need to fix, and this is the reality of missing Dennis, and that's just a guy you want to have on your team as a leader, as a consistent source of production. The guy has just been rock solid this year. Even as he sprained, tweaked a couple ankles earlier in the month, that those sorts of things derailed him last year. Not so far this year. He's just been awesome. And that brings us to trivia, which I have to introduce. It is Sarah's birthday, everybody, as we record this. She's working on her birthday, which
It
I would
is.
not be.
I
Most
made
of you
it.
guys would
I
not.
made it another year. More life.
More life, more blessings. Congratulations.
Thank
So
you. Thank
that's,
you. That's what I tell people on their birthday. Congratulations.
Congratulations. It ain't always easy. So we have to get out of here. Sarah has to go party, I'm sure. Go live it up. Getting all the VIP spots around town. But we can't let her leave without trivia. And you know what I found while I was researching last night? Something very interesting.
Tell me.
There have been 14 instances of a player scoring 40 points at least on his birthday in NBA history.
Okay.
Since moving to Brooklyn, the Nets have 3 of them, which is a record for any franchise. And they've all come in the last 6-7 years since the 2018 season.
Okay.
And it's a very random, a very obscure question. I think more fun for our listeners. There've been 3 different guards. All have hit quite a few threes in these games, at least 6 threes. One was a troubling answer, an answer that stumped you to a previous trivia question. So I'll ask you, can you name any of the 3 Brooklyn Nets?
Wait, was the one that stumped me Alan Crabb?
Correct.
So that's one of them.
Alan Crabb, we'll give that to you as a win. If you want to keep going, you can. Alan Crabb scored 41 points on his birthday.
Thank you for giving me the clue, and I'm glad I didn't get it because that then triggered in my mind to remember. Alan Crabb. I'm gonna go with Kyrie. I feel like Kyrie did.
Wow, Kyrie did. He had 43 on March 23rd, 2022 against Memphis. Alan Crabb had 41 on April 9th, 2018 against Chicago. He was 8 of 11 from 3 that day. He was on fire. And there's one more.
Part of me wants to say, but I don't think it is because I don't. Part of me wants to say James Harden, but no.
No.
Not Spencer Dinwiddie.
No, getting closer though.
Karis LeVert.
No.
Farler. D'Angelo.
Yeah, D'Angelo Russell.
Okay.
On his 23rd birthday, had 40 points in a win against the Charlotte Hornets. I
am truly convinced people play better on their birthdays. Every time someone's having a birthday, both an opponent and a Brooklyn Net, I really believe they're gonna have a big game, and more often than not, they do. I think you're just a little looser. You got a little extra mojo, a little juju in you.
Do you think you are a better color commentator on your birthday?
No, I'm not. Because
No?
I think I'm distracted. I think my phone keeps blowing up. I think that there's always like a lot of things happening, and I appreciate the love, but I'm also like I'm just trying to lock in and work.
Okay.
So no,
but that doesn't apply to players.
No, players. I think you're just playing freely. Your phones are in the locker room.
Oh, true.
People are just celebrating you. You're just happy. You know that you're going to get a lot of love after the game regardless. And yeah, I think you're just free.
And that will conclude a birthday-themed trivia section of episode 9 of The Backcourt, a Brooklyn Nets podcast presented by Ticketmaster. Next week, the Nets have a game in Toronto. Then they come home for the Jazz. Then they go on the road for the Heat. So they're bouncing all up and down the East Coast. Or, if you want to call Toronto on the East Coast. Either way, those are the 3 games we'll be talking about next week. Rate us, like us, subscribe, all that good stuff wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the birthday girl, Sarah, I'm Lucas Kaplan. Thank you guys for listening.